By now, most people are familiar with the murder of 74-year-old Robert Godwin. The Cleveland resident Steve Stevens murdered Godwin last month and proceeded to post a video of the murder on Facebook, where it remained for more than 2 hours before being taken down. This case has reignited the debate about the legal and ethical responsibilities of social media sites for preventing violent content from spreading. While sites like Facebook have been sued in the past for failing to prevent the proliferation of graphic content, these cases are nearly impossible to win. Social media sites are protected by the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which states that companies can't be held liable for the graphic content of their users. Here to discuss this case further is Sarah Roberts, a professor of information technology at UCLA. Sarah, do you think this specific case exposed a major flaw in how content is moderated by Facebook, or is it just an aspect of our modern socially connected world that we simply have to accept and we can't do anything about? What's your take?
Well, my take is that indeed this is a major downside of the social media economy in which most of us are engaged on a daily basis at this point. I've been looking at this for 7 years. I've been online for over 20 years myself. And as the users and number of people engaged in social media have exponentially increased, so too have the potential for people to use the platforms for all kinds of human self-expression, including the very worst kind, and that's what we've seen with this case.
Well, can you explain how the content moderation process works at Facebook? If a violent crime is posted, how is it posted on the site? How does the process work? That's what I think most people are wondering. Surely, is any gatekeeper? Does somebody say, gee whiz, we can't allow this to go out? Tell us about the process.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that this case has done in a tragic way is brought to light this very issue of the question of moderation. And in fact, contrary to what many people believe, that there are computers and algorithms that engage on a large scale with all the content that goes up on social media websites, it's actually really not true at all. In fact, not only is it not all computation that goes to adjudicating the content on a site, there are legions of human beings around the world who look at this material and make decisions about it. But the other piece is that the volume is so great and enormous that even with computers engaged in that process to a certain extent, which they are, all of that content cannot possibly be reviewed before it goes up. So what ends up happening on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on any number of platforms that people use is that these platforms are essentially empty vessels and rely on user-generated content to fill them. People fill up the content in volumes, in droves, it goes up online, and then it's incumbent upon the very same users, people like you and me, to see something and alert the platform in most cases.
So all the platform's doing is looking at the metrics. They're saying the numbers are going up. They're really not paying attention until somebody says, you know, this, you've got to take this down. This isn't right. And we think that there's some infrastructure to oversee this, but as you point out, there really is not much of an infrastructure at all when it comes right down to it. Look, this video was reportedly on the site for more than 2 hours. Do you think that more human curators could have gotten the video taken down sooner had there been a system in place?
To the point about the infrastructure, there is infrastructure and there are human beings working diligently on this issue. It's actually a full-time job for a lot of people, and it's one that has its own serious repercussions, as you can imagine. But the issue is one, again, of scope and scale. And what we're actually talking about is finding a needle in a haystack. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, in 2014, YouTube released a statistic about the volume of material they received. And it was something like, for every minute of every day that the platform is live, it receives 100 hours of video uploaded to the site. So what happens is there's just no way for the platforms to review and look at that volume of content. And I think you pointed out in the beginning of your comments that platforms are largely immune from being prosecuted for transmitting this kind of material under that 1996 telecommunications law. So what ends up happening is, you know, basically they get all of the reward and very little of the responsibility for what they're transmitting.
Yeah, there is another side to it, though, isn't there? Though, if we start tampering with this too much, then the other extreme is that any time you start tampering, we're going to run in the risk of, are we tampering too much? Are we closing too much down? Is there too much censorship? Isn't that kind of the balancing part of this whole thing? Isn't we're kind of right on that edge? How do we find that sweet spot? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that people are very concerned, and rightly so, about maintaining their ability to express themselves on these platforms. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that these platforms are private entities. They're for-profit enterprises. They're actually not the public square. They're not the commons that people actually want them to be and need them to be. And we've seen them come to prominence. It's no coincidence as we see a shuttering of the public sphere, a closing down of those spaces. And so when we kind of think about this notion of free speech in these arenas, it's less like, you know, the public square. It's more like the private shopping mall. So when they don't like a particular kind of speech, they're actually incredibly empowered to shut it down, and they do so already all over the world in places like Turkey and elsewhere.
Yeah, legally, Facebook is allowed to block whatever content they see fit. I mean, isn't that the quick answer here? I mean, it is a private enterprise. This is not like our public. It's not like our public airways. It's not part of the public commons, as you say. And this is because of that. They do have a lot of control. They can shut down what they want. And so with that, shouldn't we put a higher standard on them to get to do a better job? I know, look, it's all about profit, and I recognize the numbers are extraordinary, but with those extraordinary profits and extraordinary numbers comes an extraordinary responsibility. And that responsibility is to get ahead of this. Do you ever see them really getting ahead of this problem, Sarah?
Well, Mike, I mean, I appreciate you highlighting this issue, because one of the most important pressure levels on firms like this is the court of public opinion. And this horrible tragedy in Cleveland has put people in the position of asking Facebook and other platforms, just what do you intend to do to protect our rights to express ourselves while protecting people's rights to safety and to keep violence like this off the platforms? Because they're largely immune in terms of the court of law and in other ways, this is one of the few places where pressure can be applied. And I think through that pressure, the firms will ask themselves, how can we do better? Unfortunately, in the case of Facebook, the forward-facing, public-facing side of that really isn't acknowledging this problem significantly and hasn't really satisfied the public in that regard to date.
In about 30 seconds, Sarah, I've been an attorney for 35 years. I've seen the ways that law evolves, the ways that good lawyers find ways to solve these problems. Do you see them making an inroads? Do you see lawyers making any inroads to solve this problem with the 1996 Act?
Well, it's certainly put it on the map. It's put this issue on notice. I mean, one thing I've been thinking about in the fallout of this horrible case is, as that material stayed up, the murder of this senior citizen in Cleveland stayed up for 2 hours, we know that people viewed it. Thousands of people viewed it. Where are those people, and what harm has been done to them by perhaps coming across this material quite innocently without knowing what they were going to see and being exposed to that? What about their harm? And so that's one way I'm thinking, you know, from a legal perspective, is there something to that? That's also the way I see into it also, Sarah. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your work out there. I appreciate you. Thank you.